My name is Sarah, as most of you know. I work for Ally Coffee, but I also am a very fidgety person, which is why I have carpal tunnel. So I have all these weird crafting habits and stuff. And so to add to the amount of tutorials and such that SCA is gathering for coffee and crafting, I guess I wanted to share my methodology on natural and botanical dyes. So I will just say as a couple of disclaimers, I am not a professional person in general. I'm definitely not a professional botanical dyer. There's a million different ways you can do it. I'm going to share one way in which I did it, because I basically did a batch and recorded all of the steps for the purposes of this call. But I've used a couple of different methods. I have some resources like books, websites, and Instagram handles listed at the end of the outline for you to be able to reference for further research and experimentation. So ultimately, there's just so many options, and it's kind of a wide world of play and exploration. So just keep that in mind. But to get us started, natural botanical dye, you can use those phrases interchangeably to my knowledge, at least I do. It is the act of dyeing textiles with naturally occurring materials. So plants, seeds, sometimes rocks, things like that you can find out and about, or I use food scraps and such. You can use these things to apply color to a textile. I started doing this a while ago. I started doing this probably 7 or 8 years ago. Back in my hometown, there's a woman who's a clothing designer, and she started doing botanical dyes for her clothing. And so it was just super cool. She taught me a lot about sewing. She taught me a lot about botanical dyes. It was something that I did passively for a few years. And then when I moved to Atlanta, I moved in with a friend of mine who has a holistic health and skincare line. And so she and I started experimenting with botanical dyes for that line. So we made some talismans and bags, and so that kind of revived it maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I've started doing it a lot more since. So most of my life has been in the southeastern region of the United States, which is important because a lot of the plants and things that are regional to me may not be regional to everyone else. So when it comes to the experimenting part of it, just have fun. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to use 2 methods of dyeing. One is called a small batch method, which I'll explain these further later, but to kind of preview it, one of them is a way to basically dye small amounts of textiles at once. So you can use multiple jars and stuff. The other is a 1-pot method, which is, just a big stock pot full of the dye material, full of the textile. So that's the thing. I'm basically going to walk through the outline. Like I said, this is going to touch on the surface of natural dyeing. I am not a scientist. I know very little about science. So I don't know much in regards to how some of these things happen and why they happen the way they do. But feel free to ask anyways. I might have the answer, who knows. I'm going to walk through each of the elements of this outline. And I might summarize some of the parts that are a little bit more tedious, just so you're not just staring at me. And I do have props, so don't worry. This is going to get a lot more exciting. But first, we're going to start with the materials. So you want to use natural fibers. I'll go through some definitions and stuff later on, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I used muslin, a cotton muslin, and linen. This is a cotton linen blend, actually. So both are plant-based fibers, nice and white and blank canvas so this is what I used. You can pretty much use anything as long as there's not polyester, rayon, any kind of synthetic material in it. So fabrics. I also have these large stainless steel pots. I have 3 different sizes: an 8-quart, a 12-quart, and a 20-quart. So these are all my pots. Any stock pot will do. Just keep in mind that you're dyeing things, so you don't want the stain to necessarily live on something that you like. Some of the chemicals might leave residue, so if it's something that you use often for cooking, just be mindful of that. For the most part, none of these chemicals are harmful unless like they're ingested in mass quantities. So just don't like, you know, whatever. Water is another one of the ingredients that you'll need, or materials that you'll need. I have rain barrels in my backyard, so I use rainwater just for sustainability purposes and for water bill purposes. But for this tutorial, I use tap water just to try and mimic what other people might have access to. It's similar in the sense to coffee in that whatever is in your water might produce different colors or react to different types of fabrics and yarns and textiles differently. So I don't know, feel free to experiment. The other thing that we'll need is a mordant. So I'll define this a little bit later, but the two mordants I'm using are alum powder and iron powder. Alum powder, where'd it go? Oh, here it is. Potassium alum sulfate. This is like, obviously doesn't come in a sesame seeds container, but I buy it in bulk and I put it in here. This is a powder that you can get in the grocery store. It's usually in like the seasonings aisle, like the canning aisle. It's something that you can use to like, it's a pickling agent and it can make pickles crisper. So it's the kind of thing that you'll find easily enough in the grocery store. And then iron powder, I've got a big bag of it. I've had this for like since I started doing this, and it lasts forever. So you only use a little bit at a time. This is iron powder. It's ferrous sulfate in particular. And this is another element of the dyeing process that I'll be using or talking about. Next, we have soda ash or washing soda. So this is a big old box of it. You can get this in the detergent aisle at your grocery store. If you don't feel like going to the grocery store, you can also just bake baking soda, basically. So it's like chemically, it's a sibling to baking soda. If you just look up how to make soda ash, you essentially just like stick some baking soda in the oven for 30 minutes and it becomes soda ash through science, allegedly. So you don't have any of that, you can make it yourself, but the soda ash will be helpful in some of the preparation steps for the textiles. You also need a stirring utensil. Stainless steel is preferred just because of the dyeing process. But if you have like old wooden stirrers that you don't care about or don't use, you can use those. I have this because it has prongs. A notebook and writing utensil. So this is my dye notebook, dye journal. If you do any like quick Google searching of botanical dyes, the first thing they'll tell you is to keep a journal of all your dye baths and the recipes you use. I didn't because I don't listen well. And I just started doing it actually a couple years ago. So I like have some swatches in here with the recipes that I used, just to kind of track like what worked, what didn't work, you know, what kind of fabrics that I used and things like that. Carly, I have like a yarn one in here too. I thought of that. I thought of you when I saw it from like way back when. So that's just helpful for writing down weights, writing down recipes, just to have some pen and paper on hand. A scale, we all know what a scale is. You'll need scissors for cutting up the fabric, gloves for interacting with some of the more like staining materials, a mask, which we should all have because of coronavirus. But the mask is like if you're leaning over the pot and it's got chemicals in it and you inhale it, it's not a good thing. So the mask is helpful. And then oven mitts or heat resistant gloves just for lifting jars out of pots of hot water. This is my only oven mitt I own, so it's like really gross, but I use it for everything. And then last but not least, a colander for straining purposes. So those are the materials. And in regards to definitions, I know I previewed it. I made these little cards too, just because I'm a subtitles girl. So the first term that we're going to define is protein fibers. So protein fibers is anything that's basically from an animal. So you've got silk, you've got wool, alpaca counts, cashmere counts. This type of fiber is going to react differently to certain chemicals and dye materials. So it's a category in and of itself for natural fibers. The second category or major category is cellulose fibers. This is like a plant-based fiber. So this is cotton, linen, hemp, muslin. So both of the fibers that I have are cellulose fibers, and they will react differently to protein fibers. So it's good to know what you're working with. The third term is scouring. Scouring is the process in which we basically clean the fiber. So we'll use a soda ash, pew pew, and go through a scour bath. And the scouring process just removes stains, dirt, like any loose kind of or weaker dyes that might be on the fabric, anything that could be blocking the dye from adhering to the fiber. The scouring process will take care of it. So that is a term that I will use. Don't be scared of it. Another one, mordanting. So alum powder, iron powder, these are two mordants that I'll be using. The mordanting process is basically a process in which we use usually like inorganic compound to prep the fabric to adhere to a dye. So it like makes the bond between the dye and the fiber more long lasting. So the mordanting process is just helpful so you don't have it just like wash out the first time it like is near water, just like freaks out and disappears and turns back to the color it was. So that's mordanting. The next one is goods. So depending on what you're using, yarn, fiber, fabric, goods is just sort of like a generic, like all-encompassing term. So that'll be a phrase or a word that is seen in the outline. And I just wanted to acknowledge what it is as a group in a safe space. And then the last one is bath, which is not as fun as a bath as we know it. Bath is just sort of a generic term for like the body of water in each step. So there's like a scouring bath, a mordanting bath, and a dye bath. So that's what I'm referring to. I'm essentially referring to like the pot, the water, everything in it. That's the bath. Those are the main ones. If I say anything and you're like, I don't think that was a real word, or I don't know what that means, feel free to put it in the chat. I can see the chat out of the corner of my eye, so I'll try and address things as I see them. And also just in general, if you have any questions, type them in the chat. I should have some time after I'm done walking through the outline for questions. So you can unmute and ask me questions, or put them in the chat and we'll address them. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I do like to guess. So it'll be kind of fun to see if I'm guessing correctly. Do I ever use, so citric acid is something that you can use. I'll talk about that, Carly, at the end of the outline in terms of like experimentation options. So no, you're fine, you're fine. You're not jumping ahead. I mean, you are jumping ahead, but we'll allow it. So one of the things that we'll talk about later are just like avenues for experimentation. So different things that you can play around with if you want to go in that direction. So I will talk about that. Don't worry. So prepping your goods. So we're going to talk specifically about scouring and mordanting. Like I said, I'm not going to read through all the lines because I don't do that. That's just not something I'm going to do. But I will summarize everything so you'll have like kind of context for it if you're doing this in person. The prepping stage is to prepare your goods for the actual dyeing process. The first thing you need to do is weigh it. So weigh it dry so you know like exactly how much you're working with. We're coffee people. We know how important weighing things is. We know how important weighing things is. Anyways. I weighed everything out, and in total, I also had an apron that I dyed yesterday, so that's included in my calculations, but I had 216 grams worth of like dry weight. So I used that to calculate some of the amounts of chemicals that'll be going into the different elements of the dyeing process. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. So I had 216 grams of fabric going into the process. I used that to calculate how much soda ash I would need. So The recipes are in the outline, but for cellulose fibers, you need like about a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half per 100 grams of weight of fabric or goods. For protein fibers, you'll need 1 teaspoon per 500 grams, just because like it's a protein, based fiber. So if you put too much soda ash in it, you'll basically just like disintegrate the whole thing and it'll be a whole nightmare. Don't do that. So the recipes are there for you to reference. Since I'm using cellulose fibers, I did like a teaspoon and a half to a teaspoon and had about 216 grams of fiber in the bath. Before each of the dye baths, it's really important that your goods are soaking in like clean water off to the side. It's similar in the sense of just like the rules of even extraction that we have in coffee, depending on whatever coffee brewing process you have. The goods need to be able to soak up the baths evenly. So if they're not soaking in water, like whatever dry parts are on the fiber might soak it up in like a different way. So my very convoluted explanation aside, it's really important to have the goods soaking in like a small bowl of water off to the side before each of these baths. So for scouring, have the fabric off to the side soaking, get some water in the pot. This is like the smallest size I have. It's like an 8-quart. So for 200 grams, it was fine. We've noted that it's about the size of my head. So if you need a good reference point, this is what my head looks like. This is what my body looks like. You want to fill up the pots about 3/4 of the way, just to make sure there's room for like simmering and boiling. But fill it up with water. Add the soda ash. Typically, as a good rule of thumb, I like to put it in a smaller container, like the powder, mix it with a little water so it's like loose and not clumpy, and then dump into the larger bath and stir it. So there aren't any clumps. You don't have to worry about it adhering to any of the goods like in an uneven way. Once you got the soda ash and the liquid in the pot, you can add your wet goods into the scouring bath. There's an Akaya scale in there, don't worry about it. And the scouring process happens. So you let it simmer for about an hour. Once it's simmered for about an hour, you turn off the heat source, let it cool down so you don't burn your fingers, and then strain it, rinse it off really well. If the water isn't clear, then you might want to do it again, just so there's, so you're actually dealing with clean fiber. It is what it is. You could also, after this point and the next point, you can store it in the fridge, or you can dry it and leave it for a few days if you wanted to. But I went immediately into each stage, so we're dealing with that. For the mortaring process, which is what happens after scouring, so we've cleaned our fibers, we're going into the preparing to dye fabric stage. I used alum powder. So I listed a soy milk method there on the outline. It's something that I typically do, but I did not do just because I didn't have the time to do it this time around. The soy milk method, you could make your own soy milk, but who does that? Literally no one does that. So I usually get this brand just because it's just soybeans and water right there. So if you're gonna do the soy milk method, it's written there pretty clearly. There's also some online tutorials, but definitely make sure that you have like good, simple, organic, blah, 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 soy milk. For the alum method, I did option 1 on the outline. It's a mordant bath. In the same vein as the scouring bath, got my pot, I rinsed it out, put water in it. I calculated what 14% of the total weight would be, which for me was about 30 grams of alum. I mixed that 30 grams in with a little bit of water so it didn't clump up, put it in my big pot of water, and then added my fabric and let that simmer for about an hour. So similar process to the scouring, but instead of cleaning off the fabric, we're basically prepping the fabric to be able to adhere to the dye. So now the fun part, we're gonna dye fabric. So dye materials, I forgot to mention that earlier. This is what I used this weekend. So first and foremost, I forgot my avocado pits again. It's fine. We all know what avocado skins and pits look like. So the skins and the pits I mixed together. You can separate them, but literally no one eats that many avocados. in a reasonable amount of time. So just don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. It's not worth it. It's already been a stressful year. For avocado pits and skins, make sure you clean them off. So make sure it's free of all the flesh, free of all the stickers, and then immediately freeze them. What I have found, and I will talk to you about later, is if you allow them to dry for too long, it loses a lot of the property that could make dye happen. So not effective. The other thing we'll be using are onion skins. So this is red onion skin. This is yellow onion skin. I don't know if y'all can see that really well. And then I have shallot skin in here too. We're looking for the papery, like outer layer of it. So it's like the dry part, specifically that won't mold. I usually just like save this when I'm cooking and put it in a jar and save it up until I have enough to dye with. The other things that I used just for my own use are dried yellow flowers. So specifically marigolds and cosmos flowers. Those are my preferred. And then I also did eucalyptus. Pew-pew. But again, in terms, especially with like food waste, I like to figure out ways to reuse things and give them a second life. And avocado pits and skins are like a really easy sort of like, I want to try and dye something and not make a mess. That's a good one to start with. Avocado pits and or avocado skins, sorry, are onion skins. That's what I meant to say. Onion skins are also really effective and make a cool color, which I'll show you in a bit. So those are the two that we'll focus on. I also had those other eucalyptus and yellow flower in the dye bath, so I'll just show you what they'd look like at the end. When you're creating the dye bath, you want to make sure you have like a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio dye material to fabric. So I like divided up the amount that I had by, that's like 216 grams by 4, since I had 4 different dye baths I wanted to use, and it was like roughly 25, like a little bit like whatever, it was roughly 25. So I tried to match that weight for all of my dye baths. So for the avocado pits and skins, I went ahead and doubled it since I knew some of them were a little dry. So I did 50 grams of avocado pits and skins. For the onion skin, I only had 27 grams of onion skins because those things are like light. It takes forever. So I didn't have quite enough to match that 25, but it was close enough. So I just figured I'd see what would happen. And then I was able to match the weights for the rest of them. So again, you want a 1-to-1, 2-to-1 thing. And the two methods are listed in the outline. The small batch method basically uses lots of different mason jars, and you rest them in the pot. So it's like 4 multiple ones. And this is, again, a way for you to dye small amounts of fabric and dye multiple things, multiple colors at once. You basically fill the jar with the dye material, fill it about 3/4 of the way with water, put it in the pot, fill the pot until it gets to about like that level, right? Like 3/4 of the way of the jar, and let it simmer for about 15 minutes. And then you add the fabric. You don't necessarily need to take the dye material out just so it can kind of continue extracting, but just mix it all in there, get a little stir, put it back in the pot, let it simmer for 1 hour to 2 hours, and then turn it off and let it cool down so you don't burn your fingers. The other method is basically this, just in a big pot. So you take your pot, fill it with your dye material, fill it about 3/4 of the way with water, and then put your fabric in there. This one pot method's better, like I said, for larger amounts of fabric. Like I used a 1 pot method for the apron that I dyed. And then like if you have like, if you wanted to do like a big napkin set or something, like you could do it all in 1 pot and not have to worry about these freaking jars. I will say, in terms of learning through failure, I use mason jars. They're the best for everything. I don't know why we have other jars in our lives. So for some reason, I lifted up the jar of yellow flowers to put the fabric in, and the bottom fell off. So, so this happens. And I mean, luckily there was already water in the pot. So like the yellow flowers just went everywhere, and I just put the fabric in the pot and not in a jar, but that was kind of a bummer. And then my washcloth that I had down at the bottom turned yellow. So, you know, it happens, but whatever. At least I know it works. So that's something. And then the 1 pot method, again, For both of these methods, you want to give the dye material a little time to extract in the water, and then put the goods in with the dye material so they can all kind of like extract and simmer together. It's really important that the fabric has enough space to sort of free float. So that way everything gets like equal access to the dye bath. With the jar method, it's tough, so it does take some like extra stirring, careful stirring, so you don't burn your fingers. But yeah, the point is just to make sure that everything has contact with the dye bath. And for step 3, if you're following along, I kind of walked through that stuff. I wanted to show you what the colors of everything looked like. So the onion skins kind of look like this. I don't know if you can really see it. It's like makeup beauty people always do this, and I don't know what it's for. But I have this little thing, if that helps. So it's kind of like a reddish, like a wine color. This is the onion skins. The avocado, listen, the avocado did not turn out. It was very frustrating. I have done avocado dyes for years, and for some reason it did not work. So this is the color that came out, which is not the color that it usually is. It's usually much pinker. So I don't know, but that's what happened. And then for good measure, this is what the eucalyptus turned out as. It's like a little bit browner of a color, a little bit murkier. There's some leaves in there, but I was too lazy. And then this is the yellow flower. So a nice yellow color. It's really fun. So those are the dye baths. That's the color, specifically the color of the water, like the color of the liquid, which is not always what the color of the fabric is going to be, which is fun. And an important note before I show you what happened with the fabric is the iron mordant bath. So an option when it comes to mordanting is to use iron in addition to or instead of alum powder. And alum powder tends to produce like a really clear color. It tends to be sort of like a true color, like an enhancement of like what the actual color would be. Iron powder creates much more of a muted, earthy, like deeper, darker color. So it can dramatically change what the end result color is. Depending on what method I'm using, I'll either do a mordant bath, similar to what we did with the alum powder. I'll just do it at the end. So I'll take the fabric after it's been in the dye bath, I'll rinse it out, I'll wring it out, and then I'll put it in a iron bath. Or you just add iron powder into the pot. But the thing is, iron powder stains everything. And it can come out usually, especially if you wash it immediately, but just keep that in mind with stirring utensils, with gloves, with pots, with your clothes. Like just be mindful of the fact that that powder in particular is pesky. So let's see some results. First of all, avocado. Bane of my existence this weekend. This is what avocado is supposed to look like, okay? It's this nice kind of like pink color, a little salmon-y. These are different fabrics, by the way. Well, actually, this is that muslin fabric that I used. So especially compared to like a white color, you can kind of see it's like a nice like brownish pink color. And then with the iron, it ends up taking on this like purple tone. So like this, kind of like purplish brown. And here they are next to each other. That's what it's supposed to look like. That is not what happened yesterday or the day before, because I tried it twice and I don't know why. But if you use this method and you use like fresh, straight to the freezer avocado pits and skins, I think that was my problem, you'll be fine. And if you're not fine, call me. Don't call me. Message me. The other ones did turn out pretty cool. So I made these little like swatch sheets, which are fun. We'll start with the onion skins. So up top are the fabrics. So this is the muslin. This is the linen. This right here is what the onion looks like with the alum powder. This is the alum powder as well. You can kind of tell like the two different fabrics took the bath a little differently. And it's hard to tell in this lighting, but it is like quite an orange color. And then this is what the same fabric looks like after the iron bath. So it's much greener, which is interesting. So yeah, there's that. I'll also show you the eucalyptus and the yellow flower because that was fun. Here's this swatch. I accidentally mixed them up because I don't know how to do things correctly, but this is muslin this time and this is linen. This is the eucalyptus. This is the eucalyptus right here after alum powder. So it's like, you can kind of compare it to the white there. It's just a little bit yellower. It's not really like a pronounced color, but with the iron powder, it takes on this really nice gray. So that's fun. Here is yellow flower, and this is yellow flower after the iron powder. So it's a very similar green color. This is the linen. This is, again, eucalyptus, and this is yellow flower. I don't have the linen for some reason up the yellow flower and iron, but it is what it is. So again, like different fabrics will take the color very differently. So you can see the muslin has a really saturated yellow and the linen has a little bit more of a subdued one. Same with all of these actually. And then I also did like little dip dye swatches so you can see the difference. So this is just an example of like how the mortaring process can change the color so dramatically. So these two here are onion. The top is alum and the bottom is iron. This is yellow flower. Again, marigolds, cosmoses, things like that. I kind of just go on walks and anything that's like yellow or orange, I pick it and I dry it and I put it in a jar. So that's why I call it yellow flower. Alum and then dipped in iron here. And then this at the end is eucalyptus. So alum and then dipped in iron there. I don't have avocado because it wasn't behaving and I'm really sad about it. And I'm very sorry. But again, it would be, this would be what alum would look like compared to the white if it were the avocado had behaved. And this would be the iron compared to the white. So those are examples of colors. Pew, pew, pew. So those are the colors that happen with my particular dye bath. After the dye bath is done, so you pull these fabrics out, you freak out because of the colors that happen. You're like, oh my God, this is so cool. What you should immediately do is strain the dye bath. So we're going on to step 4 if you're on the outline. Strain the dye bath and remove the goods. So remove the fabric, remove the yarn, whatever you're dyeing, and put them like in a bowl off to the side, put them in another part of the sink. And then you can compost the dye material if you're that kind of girl, or you can throw it away, or you can throw it in your yard. I don't really care, but dispose of it because you don't really need anything else. And especially like if you're the kind of person that I am, where you're just like, I need to use it as many times as possible. At that point, pretty much any property that could be extracted from that food scrap or whatever is gone. It's done. You've done it. Congratulations. So throw it away, feel okay. You want to be able to rinse the fabric thoroughly. So once you set the good off to the side, your fabric, your yarn, whatever you just dyed, you want to rinse it really well with cool water. So I typically take the pot and rinse it out to make sure no like residual dye bath is there, no residual dye materials in there, and fill it up with cool water, and then put all the goods inside and like wring it out, rinse it, make sure the water runs clear, which can take a little while, but it's important to make sure all the excess is out. And then you want to run it through a wash cycle. So you can either rinse it really, really well, or put it in the, or no, rinse it really, really well, and then do like a spin cycle in your washing machine just to make sure it's all out. Or you could wash it in your washing machine on gentle. That was the other thing I was gonna get. You want to use like a natural detergent. So something like Method has some really nice ones. Something that is unscented, something that is like, I don't know, whatever the greenwashing marketing campaigns are, like ingredients you can pronounce or whatever, but something that's not going to be so intrusive and corrosive to the dye that you just did. So a gentle wash cycle, a gentle / natural detergent, that's the go-to. You only want to use a little. And the point of washing it is to make sure that any excess dye is out of there. especially if you're making clothes or prepping fabrics to be made into something that's wearable. You don't necessarily want the dye on your skin or to like get all over your other pieces of clothing. I don't know if you're a layering person. The washing and rinsing process will help make sure that everything that isn't attached to the fiber is gone. So that is the process. In terms of care instructions, spot cleaning and hand washing is preferred. If you wanted to machine wash it, make sure it's on gentle, make sure it's with a natural detergent. And again, you can always re-dye it if you want. That is a way in which a lot of botanical dyers achieve like purples or like, complementary colors. They will dye it yellow and then dye it blue and it creates green. They'll mix the fabrics once they've been dyed, or they'll re-dye it in different ways to create new colors. So that is a way to sort of like revive it if it's fading a lot. But this methodology that I just raced through, is the best way to ensure that the color will be long lasting and light fast. So things like turmeric, things like coffee, they can dye fabric, but they aren't necessarily light fast. So the second you get it out in the sun, it starts to fade and can fade within like a week of it being like out and about. So there's something to keep in mind. Before I go into some experiments, some projects, some other stuff, does anyone have any questions about that whole process? And you can save questions to the end if you want, but I just want to pause for a second. Cool. Well, if you do have it, type in the chat box, how did I learn all of this? Lots of experimentation. I had, to answer Kathy's question, I had a friend teach me a lot of this. I have no idea how she learned. And to be perfectly blunt, Indigenous people have been doing this for years. So it's one of those like things that we've just sort of like acclimated or learned or has been passed down. But I was shown it by a friend and then just did a lot of experimenting and a lot of research, which I have some resources I'm going to go over in a bit. Beth, how long does it typically last? Oh, I forgot to show y'all this. Whoops. I meant to show you this in the beginning so you'd be interested in what I had to say, but then I forgot. So here are a whole bunch of fabrics that I've dyed over the years, and I'm really bad about doing it and then putting it in a box and forgetting it forever. So it's lucky for y'all because you have lots of different colors to look at. But Beth, like some of these I dyed like 4 or 5 years ago. And granted, they haven't really seen the sun that often. I haven't really worn them around a lot, but they hold their color. It probably, depending on how, like, denim jean style, like depending on the amount of times you wash it and wear it and use it, it should last you several years. That's my completely uneducated guess. And yeah, I mean, since I have these in my hand, I can kind of walk you through this other dye material that you can use, because that is the fun bit. So this right here is a gray color. This was also eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is kind of my go-to for grays. It's like a really nice, even tone of a gray color. This right here is a green. This was goldenrod, which is like a natural, it's like an indigenous yellow flower that's like we can find around here. And I put it in an iron bath. So it's this really cool green color. This right here is like a silk material, and this is onion skin. So you can kind of see how orange this is compared to this. So same dye material, marginally different recipes, but specifically different fabrics produced wickedly different colors. And same here, this is also onion skin and iron. And this is a little bit like, it's still green, but it's a little bit grayer than that green, which is kind of cool. The onion does not smell. Just check, doesn't smell. I would say for the most part, the thing that I have found that leaves the most smell is the soy milk mordant if you don't monitor it closely. So I've done soy milk mordant when I've just like left it and the soy milk got a little funky and then it just like leaves that smell on it. It's kind of like a musky smell. Because you're rinsing it so often and because you're putting it through the wash process, for the most part, the smell is gone. Not much of the like onion or avocado or flour, whatever you use, is imparted on it. Like a lot of people will be like, oh, I dyed with rosemary and it creates a stress-free environment. It doesn't smell like rosemary. That's a lie. Well, maybe it does. I don't want to call everybody a liar, but it's not going to be so pronounced of a smell that you'll notice it, to be frank. So this is also what avocado should look like, just to make me even more mad. I wish it could, it's very pink. I don't know if you can tell, but it's very pink. This right here is a like natural, why did I say natural? I don't know. It's a, it's a weed, let's be honest. I don't want to be disrespectful because it does have a lot of medicinal properties, but it's called muslin and not muslin, mullein, sorry. It's called mullein. And it's just like a lamb's ear type thing, but made this really cool like highlighter yellow color, which I was not expecting. This is more yellow flower. And then these two are rosemary. I typically use iron powder with rosemary. It makes kind of like a bluish gray color. It's a little bit softer than the eucalyptus. And the rest are pretty much repeat. So you've got onion, avocado, and then this is more eucalyptus. I did a big batch of eucalyptus a while ago, so I'm still living off of it. Other things you can try, acorns make a really nice black. So if you want to take like a lighter color to like a darker color, then acorns work really well for that. Different types of berries could help as well, but berries need to be treated very specifically because of how different they are chemically to plants. But yeah, honestly, just like experiment with it. It's kind of fun. If the fabric is touching the avocados, does it leave a mark? Sometimes. I don't know if I have a good example of it, to be honest. That's part of the reason. So best question is if the fabric is touching the avocado skin, instead of just the dye water, does it leave a mark? So the answer is sometimes. If you have enough space in your dye bath for it to float around, theoretically, the avocado skin won't have enough contact time with the fabric to create a mark. But, you know, there's different like dye techniques and tie-dye techniques where you can tie things to create different shapes and patterns. I definitely have some batches in here. I don't have examples that I can find immediately that have like marks or like areas of higher saturation. So there's like just like a kind of like variance in the color, which honestly I think adds character. But that's just what I call all of my mistakes. You know, it just adds character to life. It's just seasoning at that point. So overall, Beth, if you have enough space in your pot or in the jar and you're stirring frequently enough, you shouldn't see those kinds of marks, but they may happen and it's not going to be so frequent that it would, in my opinion, negatively affect the end result. So it is what it is. The next avenue of experimentation, Carly, this one's for you, is just the chemistry of it, the chemicals you can use for mordanting, the pH of the dye bath, that has a huge effect on the color. Carly mentioned citric acid at the beginning of the call. Citric acid is used, limestone powder is used, chalk, lime juice is also used. You can add it to the dye bath. You can add it to like a post-dye mordant bath. There's different methodology for it. And the idea is you can create new colors or at least create new shades of colors. Carly asked if it's in place of alum. Not necessarily. I like to rely on alum, which is why I was like almost out of it when I showed y'all. My sesame seed container is almost empty. I like to use alum just like across the board to prep the dye. There are some dye materials that you can use that don't necessarily need mordanting. Acorns and avocado pits and skins are examples of it. It doesn't hurt it to do it. So I usually just throw it in the bath if I'm already prepping a lot of fabric for it, but you don't necessarily need it. And so I have never really tried to combine them, is the short answer, Carly. I would say if you're going to use things like citric acid or cream of tartar is another one. Some of these pH adjusters, then start with your baseline, as with any scientific experiment. Start with your like constants, and then make some small tweaks, like maybe mix it, add it, do without, try and see what happens. But from what I've experienced and from what I have researched, you could dye fabric without alum and use some of like these other mordants and chemicals. But I don't have the patience for it. I basically found some ingredients that I liked and that I could afford and that I could buy in bulk, and I stuck with them. So be free to experiment on your own. The other things you can experiment with are fabric types. So I think I showed you some examples, like these two fabric pieces here are different types of cotton linen, different blends and different thread counts, and they were in the same dye bath of eucalyptus and iron and made wildly different colors. And it is largely because of the different types of fabric. So it just, I know there's science to it, but I also don't know science. So I can't tell you exactly why certain colors produce and why certain ones don't. But that's part of the beauty of the journaling. So I can keep track of like where I got a certain type of fabric, you know, what the recipe was, what kind of color was produced, and then do my best to recreate that effect if I want to. The other variable that you can play around with is heat. So different recipes might ask you to get to a certain temperature in the dye bath and then hold it, or like hold it for a certain amount of time and then like drop the temperature or increase the temperature. I lost my meat thermometer forever ago, and I don't have another like temperature taking device in my kitchen. So I just look for bubbles. I like bring it to a simmer, hold it at a simmer, and that's it. I use cooking rules in my kitchen, so I don't know much about heat. Heat is a variable that I don't really play around with that much. But yeah, so those are I walked through a long list, but in terms of experimentation, it kind of all is one big experiment. Like I said, I've chosen ingredients that I know work and that I'm comfortable using and I can access. And I've chosen dye materials that I can access and gather. And I kind of just stick with that because I don't want to take on too much. But the world is your oyster. So before I get into like some other projects and stuff that you can do, I will just quickly note at the end of this outline, there are some books. So the Journeys in Natural Dyeing is a book that I relied on a lot for recipes and such, as well as Botanical Color at Your Fingertips. Those two books, like the first and the last one on that list, are books that I reference a lot. And those Instagram handles, those are all people who specifically have botanical dye and natural dye tutorials on their social media platforms. So they're people that you can follow and learn stuff from. I specifically want to point out Cold and Deadly. That Instagram handle did some dye like water experiments. So showed like the same dye bath just with, or same ratios just with different water. So like water from a local river, water from a rain barrel, water from the tap, distilled water, and showed how the colors changed, which was super cool. And then I listed two websites as well. Botanicalcolors.com is a good website that has like workshops and how-tos. They also have a store where you can buy some stuff. And then Domestika is a online platform for artists to like host courses, but it's specifically Spanish speaking. And I found out about it because I wanted to like practice my Spanish. And so signed up for some courses on botanical dyeing there, and they have some really good insight. So if you know someone who's Spanish speaking, if you are Spanish speaking, if you are like me and you wanted to like practice and support Spanish speaking artists, I would recommend Domestika. They've got a lot of cool stuff on there, but specifically the botanical dye tutorials were super cool. And then I guess to finish it off, I figured I'd just show you some of the stuff that I've done to like inspire some ideas, and feel free again to keep typing in questions in the chat, or you can like unmute and talk to me, whatever you feel comfortable with. But the apron that I dyed, this is the apron. I got it at the antique store for like $3, and it was like this bleached white apron. I don't know if you can see it. But I figured it'd be like gray would be a nice color just to like be able to stitch on. So that's the apron. And then I have this canvas material that I dyed with iron and onion. It's going to be a purse. So it's like in the very early stages of pouch hood. Pew pew. So that's something like little bags, like little satchels and zip bags and stuff. Carly, for you yarn people, this is one of the talismans that me and my friend made. This was dyed with onion skins. So this is like some silk yarn that we used. I will say, Carly, I'm talking to you in particular just because I know that you knit and crochet, but anybody else can. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. If you are going to dye yarn, I would highly recommend you keep the yarn in the skein before putting it in the pot to dye, because we did not do that. And I learned so many new swear words trying to untangle an entire skein of yarn after boiling it for like an hour. So don't do what I did is the short version. This is a little organza bandana that I dyed. It's like it's avocado and iron. And just to hold it against, it's kind of like a brownish color. And then I like stitch the hem on the end because I have way too much time on my hands. And then this is one of my favorite ones. I just finished it. This is like a little wall piece quilt that I did with some yellows and browns that I dyed. So if any of you want to talk about quilting, that's all I do. But yeah, so like clothing is a big one too. Like if you wanted to, you know, patch together some clothes or like a dress, if you have like a white linen dress, and, you know, we're all over white linen these days because the Colts took it from us. So, you know, if you wanted to dye it a different color, you could throw that in there. Aprons are good. Like I said, napkin sets are really common. Those are really fun. But those are some things that I've worked on. Oh, and then for another rabbit hole, I feel like this is just like my confessional. This is I'm surrounded by all of my wasted time. My favorite way to learn about new dye material is to just go on walks and forage for things, admittedly, because I just really like knowing like what does that plant do and like what benefits could that plant have, and just understanding a little bit more of my immediate environment. It was like one of my favorite things when I first moved to Atlanta. I would talk on the phone with a friend of mine, and we would just like exchange pictures as we would like go on walks, and like, oh, like this is chickweed. Like, what does chickweed do? And botanical dyeing was one of the elements of that. Like, oh, this makes that kind of a color. Like, we should try and dye with that. So I found that a lot of flowers and just plants in general would not adhere to fabric as well as I wanted it to. So I ended up just like making paint pigments. I don't know if you can see it really well, but basically like taking the color out of the dye bath since it wouldn't latch onto the fabric, and making pigment on it and making paints. So you can like mix it with egg yolk or honey, or I have like clove extract and some like glycerin, and I make like little kind of like gouaches and watercolors. Like this is Cosmos. This is like a yellow flower. This is Morning Glory. You know Morning Glories? They're the flowers that only bloom in the morning. And then these are some like different types of cone flowers, and these really cool like teal and purple color. And the same rules apply. Like for the most part, you just use the same chemicals you do with natural dyeing. Light fastness is a concern with paints, but that's just like another rabbit hole that I've found myself running down as I like do more and more of the botanical dyeing. So yeah, I don't know. I just ran through that really quickly, but does anyone have any questions? Or want to talk to me? I feel really weird just talking to myself. Cards on the table.
Sarah, you're amazing, by the way. Holy crap. How do you find time to be so organized? I love you.
I mean, the secret is it's all just simmering for an hour. So it's really fun. It's a good way to like use food waste and take up space in your freezer.
It was amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I'm accessible if people want to message me on Instagram or email me. I'd say call me, but everybody at my work calls me, so I have this weird aversion to my phone. And yeah, if you have any questions or want to like get excited about something that you successfully dyed with plants, I'd love to see it because that's like what makes me excited. Yeah.
I'm super curious to try it. Thank you. This is cool. Especially because we go on walks right now, so I'm going to try to pick up random things.
Oh, for sure. Like all you can do is go on a walk. Especially out west, you still have nice weather. Out here, it's like, well, I can dye with straw and it'll be brown.
I like the purse idea, like the little clutch thing. That's cool too. Like I didn't think about those kind of things.
I mean, when you have boxes of fabric in your way, the things that you can make out of fabric really you dig down. You get creative.
Do you ever use like old t-shirts and stuff? Like
t-shirts you can use as long as they're cotton. I have had a couple of instances in which I've dyed t-shirts and it's been semi-successful. One t-shirt in particular had that soy milk smell on it, so I don't call it a success, but you know, it is what it is. But yeah, so like, especially if you have clothes that you want to try and like revamp, white cotton t-shirts, as long as they're 100% cotton, sweatshirts, linen things, theoretically they should hold up to it, but they will react to the color differently. So some of those like white cotton t-shirts have been bleached, so the scouring process is really important, but it still might not latch on to the dye as well as like a totally like blank slate like swatch of fabric or something. But it's worth a shot because like, you know, just need a pot of water and some time. Oh yeah, kids clothes. Like there's actually, so Dogwood Dyer, who's one of the Instagram handles that I list on here, has kids and does a lot of like botanical dyes for kids clothes. Like, oh, I was gifted these and I hate the color, so like I'm going to dye it, and this is this is like what it looks like. So definitely like in a way to like revamp hand-me-downs or making like some of the more obnoxious kid clothes colors more subdued. She does a lot of that.
that's cool. Can you link that again or send that again?
Yeah.
I joined a little late, so I missed that part. But yeah, that sounds great.
There it is in the chat. Maybe you covered this before, but is there fabrics? So fabrics that are best to use, Kathy, would be like natural fibers. So specifically, you want to look at things that are like naturally occurring materials. So there's protein. Wait, let me get my flashcards. I'm really excited about these. There's protein-based fibers, which would be wool, silk, cashmere, alpaca. So like anything that comes from an insect or an animal. Protein fibers, those will hold up well to the fabric dyeing process. Not bath. Cellulose. Cellulose fibers are plant-based fibers. So this is cotton, linen, muslin, hemp, these kinds of blends. This will categorize as cellulose fibers, and this will also work. So the fabrics that I used for the tutorial were cotton, muslin, and linen. How much different will temps take? So in regards to temperature and color intensity, the short version is I don't know. What I have found makes the most difference is concentration. So the ratio between water and dye material and goods. It's a pretty loose relationship. So like, for instance, with the small bath method, when you use the jar, there's some people who like put less water in and like have everything like condensed and super compact. But you can't really stir it around that well. So it's like kind of not my favorite. But I have found that I achieve at least a similar color if I use this method with this much water versus this method with this much water. So if there is a relationship between concentration, I know it exists because I've seen it happen, but I don't know exactly what it is. And then in regards to temperature, I think it's similar. Like, I'm sure there is an effect, especially when it comes to some of the chemical compounds you use, but I don't know what that is. So that's one of the avenues. Like, a lot of the recipes that you'll find will be like, hold it at 130 degrees and then hold that for 60 minutes, or, you know, rise to 200 degrees for 30 minutes and then like reduce down to 150. And I don't have the attention span for that. So I don't do that. But yeah, whatever science happened broke my jar. So I'm really bummed about that. But yeah. Still bummed about that. Dyed my washcloth. Well, I mean, if no one else has any pressing questions, the outline is yours to use. And I guess, you know, y'all are welcome to post that alongside the recording. So that way it's accessible to people. But yeah, I guess we can call it.
We'll do it. Thank you so much. This was amazing. And I feel like my brain is just like, what?
It's the new sourdough for coffee people.
I was thinking of going to my grocer's because they have a florist there, and I'm always seeing them just cutting things up and putting it in there.
Oh yeah,
Can I just have your? Yeah.
I like will buy flower bouquets and I'll just dry them and save them and then dye with them.
I was thinking of just asking for their trash.
Oh, that's the move. At the grocery store, I'll do that too. I'll like stuff a whole bag full of onion skins, and people will be like, "Did you want to pay this?" I was like, "I'll pay for it, but that's mine. Don't take that from me."
I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah.
You're
This is
welcome.
great. Really fun.
Hooray! Well, bye everybody.
Bye everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Is the recording over? Do I?